But now our speaker says things are changing. To tell us about the soft revolution in Pakistan, here's Imran Khan.
Thank you, Richard. Well, there could be a hard revolution if the soft revolution doesn't work. So, I mean, what we are hoping is that there will be a soft revolution. But how have we got here? The opinion polls which you just mentioned, there's also been Pew polls, and all the polls are reflecting that all the other parties are going down. And the only party that is going up is, of course, the Tehreek-e-Insaf, which you see up there. And there's a reason for this. The main reason is that for the first time in Pakistan's history, we have a free media. For the first time since, and this is since last 6 years, we have an independent television, electronic media, which is allowing the opposition to come onto the television, and the most popular programs every evening are the current affair programs. So in Pakistan, no soap opera has the ratings of a current affair program. And these current affair programs have changed Pakistan. In the last 6 years, every evening, there are about 8 current affair programs where there are opposition, government spokesmen. And in these current affair programs, we've seen this soft revolution develop. So the first sign that there was a soft revolution in Pakistan was what was called the lawyers' movement. This started in 2007, March, when General Pervez Musharraf removed the Chief Justice. Now, normally this has happened in Pakistan, that dictators, even politicians, have attacked the superior judiciary, but nothing has happened. And in 97, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court was physically attacked by the ruling party's gangsters, their party workers, and he had to save himself by running away from the Supreme Court. And he was removed. Nothing happened. This is in 97, because the Chief Justice then had started contempt proceedings against the then Prime Minister. Now, this time in 2007, 10 years later, when Musharraf removed the Chief Justice, because of the independent television, suddenly what started off as a little protest, and I'm proud to say I was part of it, because my party, Movement for Justice, our number one point of the manifesto was that there should be an independent justice system. You can't have democracy until you have independent judiciary. You can have elections, but without an independent justice system, you cannot have a genuine democratic system. So therefore, we were in the forefront of the struggle. And there were only 50 people which appeared in the first protest. But the television, the cameras picked it up, they made it into an issue. And within few months, within about 2 months, this had become a huge movement. And this movement was broad-based, from religious parties to secular groups to the left-wing parties to the civil society. Everyone participated in it. And this movement was so powerful that General Musharraf was forced to reinstate the Chief Justice. But he was very uncertain. There was a 2-month period where he tried to negotiate with the Chief Justice to allow him to contest elections as the army chief. Now, clearly these negotiations broke, and so General Musharraf imposed the emergency. The Chief Justice was again removed. Some of us were put into jail. A lot of political party, all the senior leaders were under house arrest. A lot of the lawyers were jailed. But the movement continued. And there was an all-parties democratic alliance where all the parties, except the ruling party, became part of this alliance. And so this movement again started for the reinstatement of the Chief Justice. And this movement then boycotted the elections, because we felt that without the Chief Justice under house arrest, media muzzled, Musharraf having his own pocket judges sworn in by him, and then who then legitimized his elections as an army chief. He became the president. So we boycotted the elections. But unfortunately, a counter-revolution took place because this movement was just rising up when one of the main players, the convener of this all-parties conference, the convener was PMLN, one of the main two major parties which have held power since the past, since 1988. So at the last minute we were ditched. He ended up contesting the elections. Elections got legitimized, and so the whole movement went down. Then again, when the new government came in, which was under Asif Zardari, the People's Party government, again the all parties movement was revived for the reinstatement of the Chief Justice. And this time, the movement grew. First of all, there was an attempt to get him, we tried to do a sit-in in Islamabad. It failed. But in the second attempt, thanks again to the media played the biggest part in it. The main reason why finally we succeeded was because of the electronic media. The coverage given to it, the constantly opposition leaders coming on television, giving their viewpoints, the government defending. So you had a very intense debate on television. And because of this, the public opinion changed towards the Chief Justice. So the people followed this, what was called the Long March to Islamabad. And finally, the government under Zardari capitulated. And so the Chief Justice was reinstated. So this was all part of the, what I call the soft revolution. But unfortunately, what has happened since then is that Asif Zardari, who's now the president of Pakistan, who faced massive corruption cases, he did what all of us thought was impossible. We never thought he would last, but he was clever enough. He gave a stake to all the political players in the system. So all the parties had a stake in the pie. All of them were given, one party got hold of one province, which is Punjab, so they ceased to become an opposition. Then one other, ANP, got hold of what is the KP, what was the former frontier province. MQM was in Karachi, People's Party in Sindh and the center. So all of them had a stake in saving the system. But unfortunately, as things have degenerated, corruption has broken all records, which was bound to happen. Because once you have criminals allowed to contest elections under what was the NRO, this was a deal done. This is very important for you to understand this. There was a deal done, brokered by the Bush administration, between General Musharraf and the People's Party under Benazir. According to the deal, all cases were dropped, all corruption cases were dropped against Benazir Bhutto and her husband. And not only them, other politicians and bureaucrats. So this amounted in rupee terms to almost ₹1 trillion worth of corruption. Of 8,000 people was given amnesty. And under the name of reconciliation. It was supposed to be they were trying to make out as if this was a Mandela type truth and reconciliation. The only problem was the truth was missing. It was just reconciliation. So no one admitted how much money they had stolen. And so under the garb of reconciliation, we had all these criminals allowed to contest elections again. And the biggest surprise, of course, was Asif Zardari, who had been in jail for corruption cases, then contests the presidential elections and wins it, and is backed by the entire political class. Now, for a while, it seemed completely hopeless that they have a stranglehold, the crooks, the corrupt politicians, the mafias, it seemed that they have a stranglehold over the system. But because, again, of the media, and because of the Chief Justice, a Supreme Court, first time we have a Chief Justice who's independent. We've never had a Supreme Court that has been independent. So what this Chief Justice did was he then brought on the cases, the corruption cases. The government then defied all the judgments. 18 judgments of the Supreme Court have been defied by the government so far. But what has happened is that the level of awareness in public has been rising all the time, and people have realized that this system is unsustainable. The country is suffering from a huge now deficit between the expenditure and the revenues. Pakistan now has the lowest ever tax GDP ratio probably in the world of 8 to 9%. And the poor pay taxes, indirect taxes, and the rich do not pay any taxes. It's a similar situation to just before the French Revolution. The nobility was tax-free. So Pakistan today, the rich are exempted from taxes. There are so many loopholes to get away from paying taxes. So all the money is collected from indirect taxes. Inflation is double-digit. In fact, it's unprecedented inflation in Pakistan. Poor people, more and more people falling below the poverty line. Lawlessness, and lawlessness because of again, the interior minister has massive, all the police force is under him, the law enforcement is under him. He's accused of massive corruption cases. So therefore, corruption is the one issue which I brought 15 years ago, my party, Movement for Justice. Corruption was we felt was the main issue. No, there were no takers, no listeners. Suddenly, everyone realizes that corruption has now become the #1 issue of Pakistan, which is why you see my party, going up in the polls. But the other reason why we are now moving towards a soft revolution is the total breakdown of law and order in Pakistan, and the involvement of political parties in protecting criminals. So in Karachi at the moment, I don't know if you've been following, but what has happened is that the three main political parties that are in government in the Sindh government, which is where the capital is, Karachi, all three political parties have their militant wings. And these militant wings are involved in extortion, they're involved in land grab, they're involved in target killing. And so there was a report, a joint investigation committee did a report, and they actually came out publicly that the criminals are being protected by the political parties. Hence, since the last 3 years, 6,000 people have been killed, but no one has been convicted because the killers belong to one of the main political parties. All three are in power in the Sindh government. So what is happening in Pakistan right now is that in one way, it is the worst of times. Things can't possibly get worse if you look at any indicator, whether it is the economy, whether it is the law and order. Just to give you an indication, in a province, Punjab, which is better run, always was better run than the other three provinces, in Punjab, kidnapping for ransom. In 2008, there were 900 kidnappings for ransom. In 2011, there have been 13,000 cases of kidnapping for ransom, including the governor who was assassinated by his bodyguard. His son has just recently been kidnapped. So as the economic situation goes down, as unemployment and inflation rises, unemployment rises, more and more the law and order situation is broken down. But the silver lining is that the level of awareness, the desire for change in Pakistan is unprecedented. So since we are the only party which is untested so far, and I'm probably the only politician who people trust with their money or who can collect money in Pakistan, otherwise none of the politicians are trusted. This is where my optimism is, that I think this is, for the first time in 15 years, I feel that nothing can stop the process of change anymore. I do not think, although I think the political players, we all know they are mafias, they have lots of money, the politicians are getting richer because of the corruption, but the people, and especially the young people in Pakistan, if you go anywhere in Pakistan today, they have turned against the main parties. And my party is growing at such a phenomenal pace that we unfortunately do not have the infrastructure to cope with this influx that's coming in. And things are happening like we have whole villages deciding to join the party and then telling us that we have become members of your party. And I feel that the next elections, which will be sometimes next year, I feel that we will have a bigger change, a bigger wave than it was once when I remember as a teenager, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, Benazir's father. In 1970, in an election, he was an outsider. He had a new party. His party was only 4 years old. But in that election, he completely swept what was then West Pakistan, or what is now the present Pakistan. And it was all the young people went behind Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And he defeated all the old political houses. The change now, which I see, is going to be far bigger than that. Because the desperation in the country is far greater than in 1969-70, which I still remember. Things were, compared to now, things were prosperous. There was rule of law, our systems worked, our institutions worked. We had, the education system was far superior. But now, everything has collapsed. And the only one institution which is now holding the country together is the army. So here we see a situation where here was everyone celebrating 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, when we had elections and General Musharraf was ousted. Now in Karachi, all political parties, the civil society, all of them want the army back in Karachi to control the situation. So such has been the deterioration. And these political players, because they have all got discredited, that's where I feel Pakistan has its best chance. Now, how do I think the change will happen? Number one, the first significant step that has been taken is by the Supreme Court. Having an independent Supreme Court, the Supreme Court has, on my party's petition, out of 80 million votes, which were registered in 2008 in the last election, out of the 80 million votes, on our petition, the Supreme Court has annulled 37 million votes, which were bogus votes. So the reason why change could not take place before was that all these political parties already had these bogus votes in every constituency. So they all started with a 20,000 advantage. So now on our petition, these 37, which is 45% of the vote, has been found out to be bogus and annulled. And on top of it, 35 million voters have been ordered to be registered, which were the young voters, which were not registered in 2008. So this in itself, if you consider that the two main parties, their total vote so far is 18 million. So if you consider this 37 million vote going out and 35 million new voter coming in, I think this in itself is going to make a huge difference. Let alone the fact that there is this big desire for change in Pakistan in every section of the society today. So while it's the worst of times, I see a great time ahead. No one in this situation would predict that Pakistan would now get out of this mess. But I actually see, for the first time, I see hope in Pakistan. For me, the disaster would have been if we had kept going as we were. This time, thanks to this independent Chief Justice, who's a real hero, and thanks to this media, which, by the way, has paid huge sacrifices for the struggle. Just to give you an example, in FATA, which is the federally administered area, 26 journalists have been assassinated because either the militants wanted them to keep quiet, or unfortunately our own security forces did not want them to tell the truth. So the journalists have really put up a real struggle. And because of that, we now have a situation where our media is so vibrant. A situation takes place, any incident happens in the morning, 8 current affair programs would be discussing the program in the evening. So people are politically aware this time. And this is why I think that whenever we will have elections, I think we will have the biggest ever change in our history. Of course, I think my party is going to win. I think that the party is going to win because of its credibility. The only thing people now, the corruption being the main issue, People want to see a change, a credible alternative. I see the problem which we are facing, of course, which I did not mention so far, is the war on terror. We have 140,000 Pakistani troops in the Fatah area bordering Afghanistan. There is a civil war going on there. The more military takes action in the area, the more there is a reaction, the more collateral damage, the more suicide attacks. Suicide attacks are almost a daily occurrence in Pakistan. And unless this madness stops, the country is getting more and more radicalized. So what is threatening us right now is the polarization that has taken place in Pakistan because of the war on terror. Polarization is that either you're on one side of the divide, either you are a pro-American and a collaborator and anti-Islam, or you are pro-Islam, pro-militant. So it's such a divide now that it's very difficult to have a healthy debate on what, even on Islam. Islam has now become something you just cannot talk about because of the fear that you might be considered on the other side of the divide. So for instance, we've had imams of mosques who've condemned suicide attacks. They've been killed, they've been bombed in the mosques. About 8 or 10 imams I know have been killed. We have the ANP, which is considered to be on the other side of divide as being pro-American. Almost 150 workers of the ANP have been murdered so far. And we, of course, had the classic case of the governor, that he, in normal times, the statement he made about the blasphemy law would not even have made any news. And he was killed by his bodyguard while all the other bodyguards watched. And then the man who killed him was showered with rose petals. And people were scared to give a statement against condemning that assassination. So such is the polarization in the country. And so the way out of this war on terror is there is only one way out, a political situation. There is only one way in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. It has to be a political dialogue. And a political dialogue, and then isolating the real ideological terrorists. So in Pakistan, we never had any militant Taliban. It was military operations, collateral damage that created the Pakistan Taliban. Military operations started in the tribal area in 2004. It took 2 years of military operations and drone attacks to create what became the Pakistan Taliban. And now, there's various groups that call themselves Pakistan Taliban. So we have now militants, majority of them are our own tribal people who are fighting because of a reaction which they have always done. Any invading army has been resisted in the tribal areas. The British experienced that during the 80-year interaction in Waziristan especially, but all over the tribal areas. And before that, the Mughal Empire, which was a superpower, they also suffered heavily in the tribal areas. And then the Russians, which was, they were resisted on both sides. So 2,500 kilometer border with Afghanistan, there has never been a border. There's been free flow of population. About 100,000 people move to and fro from the border. It's a very mountainous, difficult area to patrol. So this area, the moment we sent our troops in, that was the biggest disaster Pakistan did. So 140,000 troops are stuck there. Every day there are soldiers killed and villagers being killed. And we're not winning the war. Neither is the US winning the war in Afghanistan. The answer lies in political dialogue, getting everyone across the table. In Pakistan, the answer lies in truth and reconciliation. This is where it's required because people have lost a lot. The Pashtun character, I always say one thing, that the Almighty created 2 types of human beings. One were human beings, the other were Pashtuns. They are different to normal human beings. The more you kill them, the more they fight. And so once any family loses a member, you can rest assured that the whole family will seek revenge and they will go on to the other side. So this unfortunately idiotic move of sending the army in, and when you send an army in civilian areas, they always do the same. no army in civilian areas, in my opinion, can ever operate without causing massive collateral damage, whichever army in the world. So we have ended up, our army has ended up getting bogged down there. There are human rights abuses because the army doesn't know how to operate there. They end up killing a lot of innocent people using helicopter gunships, F-16s, artillery on villages where there are women and children. So this war is not going to end unless we pull out. So I sum up, while in Pakistan we have a golden opportunity for a new country, we can actually, a new era, we can actually have the Pakistan which it should have been, a genuine democratic country. Unfortunately, it's going through a bad time, but there are signs that we can have a huge, if we have free and fair elections. And the only thing we expect from the Western countries is to help us in having free and fair elections. That's all. Pakistan will immediately move very quickly thanks to two things in place: independent judiciary and independent independent media. So as long as all we need is an independent election commission, we will immediately move into a new era. But the war on terror has to be dealt with. It cannot be won militarily. There has to be a political solution. And a credible political government is what is needed in Pakistan to open up dialogue and settle this issue politically. The feudalism is really an issue in interior Sindh, and it is an issue in the southern part of Punjab. But what is happening in Pakistan is quite amazing, because I'm probably the only politician who's now traveling all over the country and holding rallies, because I'm not perceived to be an American puppet. All the other politicians are barricaded inside. They can't go out in the public because of the fear of suicide attacks, and especially in the KP and the northern part of the Pakistan. So I'm seeing this change coming, where even in the feudal areas, you're seeing now level of awareness that is unprecedented. Women in Pakistan have never been so politicized as right now. And the youth, the students in Pakistan, in universities and colleges, until about 3 years ago, were completely depoliticized. I mean, I used to go and give talks there, and I found most of the questions were about, sports and cricket or glamour and this and that. Hardly any political questions. Now, forget about the universities. Even schools are politicized. And we did a campaign, some fundraising campaign with the school children, and these children would be anything between 10 to 15. And so afterwards, I had opened up, after motivating them to raise funds there were floods last year. So I asked them questions about sort of any question answer. 95% of questions were political by these children. So the country has got politicized, and in my opinion, what is happening in Pakistan is that the trends from the cities are now going into the rural areas. We are finding as much of a response in rural areas as in the cities. What needs to be done? Number one, rule of law. No country can move forward without rule of law. The first thing I remember as an 18-year-old when I came to England, what struck me, and by the way, there were much better times in Pakistan when I came in 1971, was rule of law. You suddenly felt there was total protection here. Secondly, in Pakistan, you need to have economic justice. And you can't have poor subsidizing the rich. Rich don't pay taxes in Pakistan. I mean, Asad Zardari is a billionaire in dollar terms. He paid no income tax. Nawaz Sharif, the other opposition leader, he has even more billions than Asad Zardari. He paid $60 tax in a whole year. So all the taxes paid by the poor people through indirect taxes. So the most rule of law and then economic justice. You have to make the rich pay taxes. And then the number 3 thing is, of course, education. I mean, our education system has collapsed. Half our population is under 20. Now, this could be a disaster if you don't educate them. This could be a strength if you do educate them. So we need an emergency level. We need to tackle education. I mean, it's criminal what we are doing right now. We are actually fighting we are subsidizing our forces in the tribal area. The aid which we are getting from the US is not enough. So we have cut the education and health budget to actually finance this war. And that's criminal because education has to be an emergency now, because if we don't spend on education and completely reform the system, and we have this youth bulge which could destroy the country. And the fourth thing immediately is a government has to get out of this war. You just have to disengage from the war in the tribal areas, because it is causing extremism, radicalization in the society. The longer it goes, the worse it is. It's not getting easier. I mean, extremism is actually growing in Pakistan. So unless we disengage from this war, you just cannot control the security situation. And the police is defending itself. The police job right now is to defend itself and the army. So forget the general population. It's either defending the VIPs, the diplomats, the ruling elite. Just to give you an example, there's an elite force, specially trained police force in Punjab. So it is 800 elite force. Out of 800 elite force, 500 of them are just defending two politicians. So you can't have this situation with poor people at the mercy of kidnappers and looters and everything because of this war on terror. So we have to disengage, dialogue, have a political settlement, isolate the real terrorists. Isolate the real terrorists, because this war on terror has been the biggest gift to the real terrorists, the real who I call the extremists. You know, the ideological Taliban. There are two Taliban. One are the reaction to the collateral damage, which is the bulk of the Taliban, are our own tribal people, and the actual ideological Taliban who want some sort of an Islamic system in Pakistan. That's a very small minority. You need to isolate them from our own tribal people. And you can only do that if you hold a political dialogue. So 4 things immediately to be done.
Thank you.
We were expecting Osama bin Laden to be found somewhere in the tribal belt. We didn't think he'd be about a mile away from the military academy. So I mean, all Pakistanis were asking the same question. But it was, I think, the most humiliating time for a Pakistani. Humiliating because here was a country that had lost 35,000 dead in this war. We had nothing to do with this war. There was no Al-Qaeda in Pakistan. Al-Qaeda was in Afghanistan, and there were no militant Taliban in Pakistan. So how we were taken into this war, and sadly, it's the same ruling elite which first took us into the war, the Afghan Jihad. We became a frontline state. Then these jihadis were heroes. The same mujahideen which we were hunting down were considered, Ronald Reagan called some of them, reminding him of the founding fathers of America. So these same people were then being hunted down 20 years later, and the common thing was, we fought that, our ruling elite fought that jihad for dollars, and then they killed those jihadis again for dollars. And people of Pakistan have paid a huge cost for this. We lost, as I said, 35,000 dead, or even more than that, maimed, because these are, remember, bomb victims. You only hear about the dead. No one talks about who survived. And when I have visited hospitals, the ones who've survived, they're minus limbs. So it's an awful. So apart from the human casualties, the government has given these figures that country has lost $70 billion. But the ruling elite, the aid, the 20 billion that has come in, has gone not to the people of Pakistan. Poverty is unprecedented in Pakistan. The economic survey of Pakistan states that never have the people of the country been in such poor economic condition that we are right now. So then, after having paid this price, then to find that our allies didn't trust the Pakistan army, so they came and did the job themselves. What did that? So firstly, the reaction against the Pakistan army, that here we are, sacrificing so much to have this big army. And then it couldn't even do a job like that. The Americans had to do it. So that was humiliating. And then the Americans, CIA chief saying either Pakistan was complicit or it was incompetent, which was so rubbing salt in the wound. So I think I've never seen such sort of depression in Pakistan. But this wasn't just restricted to the people. It was also within the army, there was a very strong reaction. And let me say my biggest worry about Pakistan at the moment is that if this war goes on, something will happen from within the army. And that is where the chaos we don't want. As long as the army stays as an institution, at least, a government, has a strong army which can sort of take care of things. But if something goes wrong within the army, which there are a lot of ominous signs, because the attack at the naval headquarters was clearly an inside job, because 6 people could not have fought 1,500 soldiers for 24 hours unless it was something happening from within. And similarly, the attack on the GHQ, there was an attack at a commando base where 50 commandos were blown up by one of them in reaction to the Red Mosque. So there are ominous signs within the army that this is an unsustainable war where you're using your army against your own people. Your first question about, just remind me. Osama bin Laden's killing in terms of violence, if anything, violence has gone up. In Pakistan, it's gone up. In Afghanistan, it's gone up. I don't think in terms of the militants operating, Osama bin Laden's life or death made any difference because he was clearly isolated. But what has happened is that violence has gone up, and there are now so many small groups operating. There's no centralized command that is, with the Taliban. There are little groups operating now. Amongst the Pakistani Taliban, what is now called the Pakistani Taliban, they are the Punjabi Taliban. Punjabi Taliban are the old jihadi groups created during the Afghan jihad. So they call themselves Punjabi Taliban. Then there's Al-Qaeda, which is almost disappeared, very few Al-Qaeda. And then there are our own tribal people, and then there are the hardcore Taliban, which are the ideological Taliban, which were from Afghanistan. So by killing Osama bin Laden, it has made no difference at all. What would make a difference is if you started talking to the majority of the people and isolated the real hardcore Taliban, the hardcore militants. So the threat to the West is from Al-Qaeda. Threat to, for instance, India is from the Punjabi Taliban, the old jihadi groups. So if you remove, in Pakistan, if you remove the tribal people from this whole, from this war by negotiation, talk, dialogue, then you will be able to isolate the Taliban who are a threat either to the West or to India. What can I say about that? I mean, I have no fear of dying. I think that, we all have to go sometime. But the issue in Pakistan right now is not about me living or dying. It means, do I want to live in Pakistan? If I want to live in Pakistan, I have to fight for it. It's as simple as that. But I saw this coming, by the way. What is happening now? Maybe the war on terror added to this. It has made this, the situation come to a climax much quicker. But I always thought that we would reach a stage where we would end up having criminals running our country, and we would have to fight for our country. If I did not think the country did not have potential, maybe I would not be fighting for it. But I actually think that the country is extremely, it can, when I was growing up as a teenager in the 60s, I grew up in a country full of hope. And the country was one of the fastest, the growth rate was one of the fastest in the developing world. Our institutions were top class. We had our airline, which used to be a number 2 airline in the world at one point, which is now losing about 300-400 billion rupees. So, we were full of optimism. We had such pride. And to watch it go down only because people in Pakistan who come from privileged backgrounds like me, were not willing to fight for it. We didn't want to go into politics. Politics was a dirty business. So clean people and honest people, respectable people did not go into politics. So it was eventually what has happened now was always going to happen if you allowed criminals to keep going into politics and not be too scared of them. People are petrified to speak out against these people. So I was the first one who took both of them on. Normally either one went on one side or the other. And they're both mafias. They are family parties. The People's Party and PML are family parties. They're just run by families. I mean, how can you have a democratic party where, when Benazir died, she's supposed to be, I don't believe it. I don't think that will is authentic. But even if, how could you will a party to an 18-year-old boy? It can't be. It's even worse than monarchy. I mean, in monarchy, at least you could train some. For Prince Charles probably has better training than an 18-year-old boy to how to run a country. So someone had to stand up. And so I tried for quite a while, but I was offered. So the mafia operates like either they try and co-opt you or they try and eliminate you. So they tried to co-opt me. I was always offered, in my 5-month-old party was offered seats with Nawaz Sharif, which I refused. Then General Musharraf offered me to join his government. But then he co-opted all the criminals. We all had great hopes in Musharraf. But he got all the criminals with him. And then tried to call the other two, Benazir and Nawaz, corrupt, when he had all the other crooks with him. So, of course, I didn't join him. And then in 2008, we would have actually, my party in the polls was at number 3. So in a coalition, we would have got some seats. But then we stood with the Chief Justice and boycotted the elections. And we were betrayed by Sharif. But this election, I know it's risky in Pakistan. Anyone doing politics in Pakistan, it's a big risk because we are up against mafias. But I think that whenever the next elections are, I'm more optimistic about Pakistan than ever in my life. I think we are going to have a massive change there. And I think all of them will be wiped out because they have been completely exposed by the media. The media has done, actually the real heroes in Pakistan are the media. I mean, this guy, Faisal Shahzad, who was found killed in a canal. I mean, the guy, he did proper investigating journalism and brought out such wonderful, exposes. He exposed all the faces of these people. And there's still others who are still, every day they will bring in, expose corruption. And so the people are fighting back. But the reason why this Gallup, in the Gallup or in Pew polls or now in YouGov, we are going up is because they've been exposed. I've been saying the same thing for 15 years. I have tried my best. I've tried to explain to the Americans. I met senators. In fact, in 2008, I went to Washington. I addressed think tanks. And I tried to explain to them that this war cannot be won because they're fighting against people who have never, ever, ever accepted any foreigners. The Pashtun system is just very important just for all of you to understand. Because I'm probably the only politician who's been all over the tribal areas. I did a travel book too some 18 years back. Every village is basically autonomous. They have their own parliament and they have their own justice system, which is called the Jirga. So they do not accept any central authority. So they run autonomously, and they only get together when there's a threat for a foreigner. So whenever a foreigner comes, they all get together. Now this is the history. This has been the history of the area. So if the Americans think that somehow the Russians were the bad guys, they are the good guys, and somehow they're being treated, they might convince themselves. But for them, when Hamid Karzai calls them an invading force, who's a total pup, I mean, the moment the Americans leave, the first casualty is going to be Hamid Karzai. But when he tells the Americans that it's an invading army, and I mean, you should see the criticism he's come up in the last few months. It means that the whole population is against against the occupation. So for them to blame Pakistan, I mean, they're calling the Haqqani group, which is in Pakistan and in safe havens. But how many Taliban fighters has the Haqqani group? 5,000? I mean, do they really think that 5,000 Haqqani fighters are stopping the Americans from having a stable Afghanistan? And they tried the surge, which failed. There's more violence now in Afghanistan than the previous year. So it's not, there is no military solution there. I mean, the British ambassador, Sherard Cooper, I was reading him, he's consistently said that there is no military solution. I don't know how they think that they're going to win this war. I don't even know what for them is victory. I don't know what will they do when they say we won the war. I don't know. I mean, is a Karzai government, if they finally stabilize a Karzai government and leave, is that victory? It's the most corrupt government ever. So I don't understand what their aims are. I mean, objectives in Afghanistan, unless there's something to do with the Caspian Sea oil. But if I was, if I ever became the prime minister, I would beg the Americans to stop aid to Pakistan. Because aid has been the biggest curse in our country. It's because of aid that we have not conducted the reforms the country should have by balancing our budget. I mean, you should look at the ruling elite. They live as if there are oil wells sprouting in Pakistan. The sort of lavish lifestyle and expenditure. So there's no austerity there. And yet the reason why they don't balance their budget is because they know either they can borrow money from the IMF, which will give money simply because of political reasons, or they will just get enough aid to bridge the gap. But all the time, the cancer is spreading. I mean, the whole system has collapsed in Pakistan. As I said, the rich don't pay taxes. The ruling elite themselves don't pay taxes. All the big political leaders have their money lying outside Pakistan. So if we did not have aid, at least there will be a greater urge to reform the country. And only reform can save Pakistan, not aid. And I think I would try and convince the Americans that, look, what we can do is we can play a part in getting you all on a table and help you in a dialogue. But this insane war is just going to go on. And I think they'll soon, within the US, knowing the situation, the economic situation in the US, I think it's a matter of time before there's an uproar about demanding results in Afghanistan and getting out. Pakistan has reached a point where the army knows that if it comes into power, it cannot solve the problems. The problems have degenerated to the point that the army knows it won't, if it comes into power, it won't be able to do anything. It's also run out of options because normally it would back either one party or the other. But both parties today are in power. One party is in power, Muslim League is in power in Punjab, which is 60% of Pakistan. People's Party is power on the rest of the country, and both have failed. So therefore, I think the army does not have a choice, but army would want someone to fix the governance system. So therefore, I think because they have to pay the bills. I mean, the first institution that's going to suffer the moment there's an economic collapse is the army, because they won't be able to pay the bills. So they would want, I assume they would want someone who can collect revenues and cut down expenditure. With India, I think the time for Pakistan, until from 1989 onwards, Pakistan was backing militant groups. Ever since that rigged election in Kashmir started, that uprising in Kashmir, what was a political movement was made into, it became militant by sending militancy into Kashmir. I think that period is over now. I mean, in Pakistan, any government should realize that no longer can you patronize these militant groups which have, like LET and other groups that operate within the country, because it's a double-edged sword. And if one realization, especially in the carnage going on in Karachi right now, is that you have to de-weaponize. You have to disarm all militant groups. So whatever relationship we have to have with India, whatever differences have to be sorted out on the dialogue table, politically. There should be end to this militancy. At the moment in Pakistan, I'm perceived as someone who is, because of my stance, consistently, I oppose the military operations. I'm considered independent. at sometimes, anyone who opposes it, a lot of press writes that, I'm anti-US. But I think it's this George Bush policy, with us or against us. So either if you don't follow the US policies, you're against them. So therefore, if you're not with them, you're anti-US. To be anti any country is weird for how can you be anti a whole country? You can be anti the policies. I have opposed all the policies of Musharraf and Asif Zardari, so I should be anti-Pakistan from that point of view. But I think in Pakistan, I just had visiting delegations of senators at my house, and I've asked them for two things. One, they should not patronize puppets in the Muslim world. This era is coming to an end. They should make friends with the people of the country. They should back a genuine democratic government, whatever it is. Like the US deals with India. India, they don't try and manipulate the elections or choose favorites. In Pakistan, this last election, the reason why we are in a mess, why we have the biggest criminal become our president, is because the elections were manipulated through this NRO brokered by the US. So what have they got in the end? They've got a man who cannot deliver. He cannot, and all the hatred against him is direct against the Americans. Because he claims to be America's man. He proudly states that I'm backed by the Americans. So, and since he's the most hated man in the country, his hatred now turns into anti-Americanism. So the US is much better off backing a genuine democratic government, which will at least be able to, whatever it says it will deliver, but it will have the credibility to deal with the militants within its own country. At the moment, if people like Zardari have no credibility at all to talk to any of the militants who consider them as stooges of the Americans, and so they have no chance of opening up any dialogue. If US backs a genuine democratic government, that government then can at least broker a peace deal, which is what is needed right now.
Imran Khan, thank you very much indeed. I think we'd all hope that your optimism about this soft revolution is justified. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.